Welcome to Adventure Time Card Wars, an iconic mobile game released in 2013, which was originally adapted from the show itself.
I flooped the pig.
It features a wide variety of Adventure Time characters you can play as, but more importantly, there's 200 plus cards to collect with different gimmicks and abilities of their own, allowing for some insane strategies, which I even end up using in this video. But with good things, there are usually also bad. And the bad in this case is that the game was taken down in 2020, meaning that new players couldn't download it. But here's the interesting part. If you have access to the original account you downloaded it on, you can just go back into your app history and just download it again. And luckily, I'm one of those people. So today, I'll be conquering the entire Card Wars campaign, which wouldn't be easy as I have to win 119 battles, strategically level up characters, and grind for specific cards just to prepare for the final boss, Ice King. Okay, let's begin this journey of reminiscence. Our very first battle is up against Finn, where the game first shows us how to place our landscapes onto the board, and then we spin the bones of a fish to choose who goes first, and it ended up being me this time. And normally it's better to go second, but I'll get into the strategy aspect a little later on. As for now, the game was explaining to us our mana points and how they work, and also what the numbers on the cards mean alongside what landscape each card is. And as we place our first card down, Ethan Allfire, the game mentions a special floop ability, and every creature has its own unique floop ability, with the Cornball card having a +1 attack. And if this is your first time seeing this game, you might be wondering how the attack phase works. And basically it's this meter with 3 different colors. The green is a normal hit, the light green is a critical hit which does double damage, and though we don't have it yet as it's the early game, later on you'll start seeing a red color, which means that if you hit that spot you don't deal any damage. And there's actually a different meter for when your opponent attacks. The red means that they deal their damage to you, the light green, like you just saw, means that you deal damage back and they don't hit you, and the normal green just means that they don't deal any damage to you. And that's actually the interesting thing about this game. You'll start to see later on that most of the opponents that we go up against usually have way better cards than us, but we at the same time have a much greater advantage as we're allowed to have crits and we're also allowed to block against their attacks. But the computers themselves neither have the ability to crit or block. Oh, and the way you win in this game is by taking out the opponent's entire health. And you can see that health on the top left, which is mine, and the top right, which is the opponent's. And the way that you deal damage to the opponent is if they don't have a creature in their lane. And just like that, we had defeated Finn in the very first battle of the game, sending us to our rewards where we unlocked a chest and got the Heavenly Gazer. And before we can enter the second battle, the game actually makes us go back and go into the chest menu where we get to open our very first algebraic chest for 3 gems. And I got a little excited because there's a very rare card that was coming out of it, but it ended up being the Comfy Cave, which if you're unfamiliar is a pretty atrocious drop compared to what else you could get. The game then shows us around the deck builder, is basically where you choose your cards that you want to bring in. And so far I've only mentioned the creature cards, but this game also has buildings and spells. And the Comfy Cave that we just got was a building. But enough tutorials, because there's now time to fight Finn for the second time. And this time he went first, placing down 2 cool dogs right at the start, which are pretty decent, and I put up 2 cornballs to go up against them. Definitely not a good matchup to have, as the cool dog is just much better than the cornball. But as I placed down my Comfy Cave, who can heal creatures, and Ethan Allfire, who does pretty good damage, and lastly Mouthball, who's a rainbow card and you can place it in any landscape, my defenses were looking up as I started taking out some of their creatures. And at this point in the game, the block meter was so slow and big that it was very easy to defend against their attacks. So most of the time, all of my creatures, even the Ethan Allfire with just 1 health, ended up surviving, which then led to me dealing direct damage to Finn. Oh, and every playable character like Jake has an ability of its own. Jake takes 3 turns to charge and gives all your corn creatures +3 attack, which gave me an insane damage boost, and I was able to take out Finn, which afterwards I unlocked Cool Dog from the chest. And next up would be the final boss battle against Finn. But before we did that, we had enough gems to get an algebraic chest, and once again it ended up being a very rare card, which was even worse than the first, being a Pie Storm. And it doesn't really matter what that card does because I literally never end up using it. And you saw me open 2 algebraic chests, but that was because I was given some freebie gems. In order to get more, you have to beat the same character 3 times with different challenges. And since I had 2 gems and I only needed 1 more to open another algebraic one, I decided I should get that 3rd gem to prepare for the final Finn battle. This battle was against the very first Finn, and the special challenge was that we couldn't use spells, and since I didn't have any, it ended up being very easy and we unlocked the second star. But of course, we had to beat it one more time with a different challenge to unlock that gem. This time our goal was that we couldn't lose more than 5 creatures, which again was easily accomplished, and we got the gem that we're looking for. So I went straight to the algebraic chest, opening it, and it was once again a very rare card. And thankfully this time it was a creature, being the Field Stalker, who has 5 attack damage and 34 health points, and it costs 4 mana. And compared to all my other creatures, this guy's pretty good, but he's only going to be good for the earlier game, as that 5 damage doesn't suffice later on. But there was a good thing about it in the fact that it was a corn creature, because a lot of the corn creatures have damage boosting floops, so that 5 damage can be very easily brought up mid-game, especially with Jake's floop. And now it was time to enter the final Finn fight, who if we're able to beat him, we actually unlock Finn as a character to play. And that actually ends up being pretty important for something I'll explain a little later on. For the most part, this boss fight wasn't too difficult either. He did have some scary plays where he was boosting the attack of his creatures using the corn dome building, and then there was also the devastating pig, whose floop ability ends up taking the attack down of every corn creature by 1. So that guy was leaving me a little powerless, but after a while we reached turn 4 where we now had enough mana to get down the Field Stalker, and this was perfect timing because we also had Jake's ability where all our corn creatures would now get +3 attack. So that earlier debuff was basically unnoticeable, and we ended up defeating so many of Finn's creatures that he didn't have anything to play, so he just went back to our turn again. And since he was at 3 health, I just pressed battle, attacked once, and we had finally beaten that boss battle, hitting the cool guy victory dance and unlocking Finn as a playable character. But next up, our opponent would be BMO, and this specific battle is why Finn is important, because referencing the show, BMO doesn't play these games with Jake as he feels like he gets too competitive. So we're forced over to switch to Finn as our main character, which can be a little annoying because I believe Jake's ability is a lot better early on, but it isn't too big of a deal, and Finn was pretty easily able to hold his own against BMO. And afterwards, we're introduced to the crafting cards area of the game, where we can combine cards that we already have, and using coins we can make better cards. So we used one of our corn balls and a wandering bald man, which turned into a traveling farmer who has some pretty good stats, as it costs 1 mana and has 5 attack and 5 defense. And since it's a pretty good card, I crafted 2 more and instantly added it to my battle deck. And you'll notice that my next battle is BMO once again, kinda like how Finn we had to fight 3 times, and that's just how the game is laid out. You fight each character 3 times. With that last battle, if you beat him, you get that character to use. And most of the characters you actually end up seeing again later on in the adventure map, and I mention that now because it's important for the strategy that we employ later on. And for our current situation, we're pretty easily wiping the floor with BMO, as his cards were kind of atrocious. And as we moved on to the BMO boss battle, I actually ended up beating him in 2 attack turns because I hit a double crit with both of my traveling farmers. So yeah, the crits can be pretty overpowered. And after beating BMO, we of course unlocked him as a character, with our next opponent being Marceline. And for this battle, I switched back to Jake because it was just better to use with all my corn cards. And again, as the opponent wasn't too difficult, we pretty easily beat them, with the exact same outcome on the second battle as well. And the third battle against Marceline actually got a little scary, as she played this mace stump that has some pretty decent attack, and I ended up missing my block, so it took out my traveling farmer. And though on my turn I was able to take it out using the Field Stalker, she then again played a second one to the far left afterwards using her hero ability, which gave it 2 extra attack. And since that specific lane was undefended, I couldn't block it, and our health was now 12 to 10. And right here I could have won if I just placed my Ethan off fire on that second lane to the right, since that would have added up to 10 damage, but for some reason I ended up using it on the very left against the mace stump, and then I placed a mouth ball on that second lane to the right, and then flooped my corn ball, which gave it 1 more attack, but that still only added up to 9. This was definitely a pretty big misplay, but it actually ended up not mattering because I crit with my corn ball and we had defeated Marceline, unlocking some new cards, but they don't really synergize with my corn landscape creatures, so I don't end up using them. But we had now unlocked Marceline, and our next opponent would be Princess Bubblegum. But before we faced her, I actually went back and farmed some more gems so that we can open another algebraic chest. And this time you get to hear the nostalgic music because I remembered to record the audio. But even crazier was the fact that we ended up getting a gold Field Stalker. And this wasn't crazy because it was good, since it was still a pretty bad card, but getting 2 Field Stalkers back to back is an insane probability, especially as this one was gold. And you can tell a card is this gold version by the golden border around it, and its stats are higher than the normal one. And to be more specific, the stats are 50% higher. But moving on, I went into the deck builder, adding my newly obtained Field Stalker and some cool dogs to the deck, and I made the decision to use Finn as my main character up until we unlocked a different one who'd be better long term. And to explain this decision, you have to know three important things. One is that as you play, your character levels up and gets more and more health, so it's important that you stick to one character as your main for the entire adventure map. Otherwise, you just get stuck leveling up characters in previous levels. The second thing, which you already know, is that Jake and BMO don't play against each other, so using them as your main character can be problematic because you're bound to run into either Jake or BMO in the future, meaning that you won't be able to use them in that battle and you have to rely on a different character, so it's better to just not use them to avoid that problem in its entirety. And the third big reason is that you can't play against the same character that you're using. So let's say my opponent was Finn, I wouldn't be able to use Finn as a character myself. This means that Finn actually is a bad choice long term as we run into him later on in the adventure map, but for now he is our best choice until we unlock this one specific character who carries us to the end. And I'll mention the character when we go up against it, because for now we just defeated the first Princess Bubblegum battle and pretty easily beat the second battle as well. The third battle was no different either, but I promise this game does get much more difficult pretty quickly, and we do actually have to incorporating real strategies instead of just spamming cards. But nevertheless, we unlocked Princess Bubblegum with our next opponent being Flame Princess. And as our battle initiates with the Flame Princess, I haven't really mentioned the other landscapes besides the cornfields. One of them is the Blue Plains, which includes the creatures like the Cool Dog, and you'll see that the Flame Princess uses all Sandyland cards, but these are only 3 out of the 6 as there's also the Swamp, Nice Lands, and the Rainbow cards. The Rainbow card I briefly mentioned with the Mouth Ball, and they can basically be placed in any landscape. The Nice Lands, you might have seen Princess Bubblegum using them, and it's basically a pink landscape. And then lastly, the Swamp is a darker landscape, which you'll see me use later on. And the cool thing about all the different landscapes and factions is that they all have different things that they're good in. The corn creatures are mostly attack focused. The Blue Plains creatures are defense focused, with a lot of their floops being defensive as well. Swamp creatures, like the Mace Stump that you saw Marceline use, usually have high attack but very low health. Nice Lands creatures are also very defensive, like the Blue Plains, but they main in healing floops. Sandylands creatures tend to be on the more balanced side in their attack and defense. And lastly, the Rainbow creatures don't really follow a pattern and are kind of random. Though since they're so versatile with where you can place them, their stats are usually lower for how much mana they cost. But now, as I'd finished the explanation of the factions, we'd also finished Flame Princess, and afterwards unlocked the Wodik Timewalker, who's a pretty decent card for the Blue Plains, and also Freezy J, who's a defensive rainbow card. But more importantly, it was now time to upgrade our corn cards, and this was specifically due to the reason that I'd unlocked the Husker Knight by battling one of the characters earlier, and could craft it using a Traveling Farmer and a Cerebral Brainstorm. So of course I did end up crafting a couple, and the Wodik Timewalker and Husker Knight both have pretty good floops. The Wodik Timewalker, basically if you use its floop, it does damage directly to the hero, ignoring the card in front of it, and this can combo well with the Husker Knight because it gives the adjacent creatures to it plus 2 attack damage. The only problem with that strategy is that both the Husker Knights and the Wodik Timewalker's floop cost 3 mana each, so it can be tricky to try and play new cards and use their floops at the same time. But either way, we were still able to beat the final battle against Flame Princess, unlocking her and a new area of the map named the Forest, with our next opponent being Lady Rainicorn. Oh, and we're also given this special task of collecting ice bags, but it's kind of pointless as it gives us a useless card, so I won't really mention it again. And more importantly, I was on the wiki for Card Wars and found that there were actually some redeem codes that I could still get, and these included some Freezy J's, which I'd gotten already, but some important cards were the Embarrassing Bard and somehow a Brief Power card, which is one of the most important cards we could have gotten, but I'll explain that later on. And after adding the newly obtained cards into my deck, I went to challenge Lady Rainicorn, who with the help of the Embarrassing Bard card was beaten very easily, with the same outcome on the second and third battles, unlocking Lady Rainicorn, and next step being Lumpy Space Princess, who our first battle against went pretty well, but on the second one she started to play stronger cards like the Beach Mum, who has a stat of 9 attack and 11 defense. And this guy is heavily threatening as it has a lot of attack and can basically one-shot all of my units besides the Field Stalker, and the attack of most of my units isn't good enough to 1 or even 2-shot it. And though the Beach Mum was a powerhouse, Lumpy Space Princess also played a Sandcastle, which gives the creature in its lane +4 attack and defense. So not only was it the creatures, but the buildings started getting more powerful as well. And you can see that I was heavily struggling here as I only had 8 health left compared to Lumpy Space Princess's 19. And it's looking like we could still win if we just defended properly and didn't miss, but then we ran into a problem where she played the Wodik Timewalker on that Sandcastle lane lane and flooped it, meaning she'd be dealing 9 damage to our face when we only had 8 health left. And I could defend, but the block meter was in a terrible spot and I ended up missing and it took me out, with us losing for the first time and the game calling us a dweeb. And since it was so close, I actually jumped right back in without making any changes to my cards, and this time things actually went much better because she didn't have a Beach Mum to start off, and eventually I was able to win with my Field Stalker. The third battle started, and about 6 turns in, it was looking pretty even, but I was heavily focusing on flooping my Woodic Time Walker and slowly just chipping away at the princess's health, and eventually we got her down to 3, and then one last floop ability and attack from the Woodic Time Walker was able to finish her off, allowing us to unlock the Lumpy Space Princess, with our next opponent being Ash. And normally, if I wasn't trying to maximize how quickly I beat the entire adventure map, Ash is actually one of the better characters to use, because his main hero ability can bring back any card from the discard pile back into your hand. So basically, let's just say I lost my Field Stalker, I could use his ability and bring the Field Stalker back into my hand and use it again, which can be pretty powerful in a lot of scenarios, and especially in the deck that we end up building for the late game. But as I am trying to maximize how quickly I beat the adventure, Ash ends up not being the optimal character to use. And this battle against Ash was actually pretty close, as we only had 4 health left, but then he ended up running out of creatures to play, so we beat him. The second battle against Ash went much smoother, and the third, though he started off pretty strong playing the Snappy Dresser, was pretty simple as well, afterwards unlocking Ash. But next up was the character that we're looking for. It was Ricardio the Heart Guy. This is the character we'd be maining after unlocking him, and you might be wondering why Ricardio specifically, and that's because he's the earliest character you get that you don't see later on in the adventure map, so I can safely level him up as much as I want and I don't have to worry about running into another Ricardio. Also, he has a pretty decent hero ability where he can draw 1 extra card every 3 turns, which does come in handy. But for now, if you look at our health, you can see that I was left at 9 and he still had 38, and this eventually turned to 1 health after this green slime dealt damage to Finn. And you can see that I had this Volcano card in my hand, and that thing basically nukes the entire lane that you played in. And by entire lane, I mean his cards and my cards, which included the Comfy Cave. But that was definitely a sacrifice that was worth it, because that 8/8 stat of the green slime was going to be problematic. And after taking out the rest of his creatures, it was pretty noticeable that he was running out of creatures to play, so all I had to do was just defend properly, which I messed up here, but thankfully the Freezy J was pretty tanky and slowly just dwindle away at his health on my attack phase, which after this Field Stalker hit, he was left at 1 health as well. But we had a major board advantage, which eventually led to my victory. The second battle was pretty intense as well, as we'd now made it past 8 turns. I was definitely noticing that my cards, though they were good, were quickly falling off, and I was gonna have to start making some changes. But for now, we were able to win against this battle, heading into the boss battle against Ricardio. And this was the battle that confirmed that my cards weren't going to cut it, because he started off extremely strong with the Herculi, who has 11 attack and 9 defense, which none of my 1 or 2 mana cards can deal with. And he played multiple Herculi that were just dominating my cards, eventually leaving me with close to nothing in my hand. And even worse was that the Herculi's Floop deals 2 damage to the opposite creature based on how many cards you have in your hand, meaning if you have 4 cards, the Floop does 8 damage. And this left me completely undefended, and the Ricardio eventually beat me. I went into the card forge to see if I could craft anything, but there was really nothing, and then I was just scrolling back and forth in my deck builder to see what I could come up with, and I ended up adding some green slimes to my deck, and that's why you're seeing that Sandylands landscape. But even this stood no chance, as the slime dealt 8 damage and the Herculi had 9 health, and since the Floop abilities made it to where I couldn't even have the chance to use the defensive meter, Ricardio blitzed me down in like 3 turns, so I knew here that I was gonna have to grind for some other cards. So at first I went back to the Ash boss battle because I had a Heifergeist card if we got that 3-star chest, but my luck was kind of atrocious and I kept getting the 1 and 2-star cards. So I went on a side quest to the Daily Dungeons of Doom, who give you cards of a specific faction that change every day, and today was the Blue Plains, but I'm not gonna lie, these weren't really worth it at all. But then I remembered something that involved the daily gift. If you just change the time on your phone, you can get unlimited daily gifts. And through one of the daily gifts, I actually got a golden cool dog, which set my dopamine off and started my daily gift gambling addiction. And this changing time and spinning part's a little boring, so we're skipping to the point where I'd now gotten 9 gems and could open 3 algebraic chests. And I'm not gonna lie, these next 3 algebraic chests might have been the best thing possible, because the first one gave me an algebraic rare card, which was the Legion of Earlings. If you're unfamiliar, the algebraic rare cards are the rarest cards at 5 stars, and the Legion of Earlings specifically is a very good card to get. And the next algebraic chest was a very rare card which worried me, but then I ended up getting Struzan Jin, Another pretty solid card who has an insane floop ability which sends the creature in front of it back to the opponent's hand, guaranteeing that we get hits on the hero. It's basically a better version of the Wodik Time Walker. But then we got a card that I think is even better than the previous two, which was the Bog Banshee Angel. It does insane damage and it has a floop that can basically clear most creatures in the other lane. And though that was the last of the gems, we still had coins to open up the normal cool chest, which can sometimes give you good cards like this Traveling Wizard that we got, even an Earl, the Pickler, and another Earl, which are all important for the one deck that we end up making. But for now, I didn't have all of the correct cards for the main strategy that I was going for, so I just added all of the ones that I just gotten into my normal deck, which I'm not gonna lie, made it very easy to be Ricardio as I dealt 48 damage with one hit. And we unlocked them with our next opponent being Dr. Donut. And because of our new cards, all of the Dr. Donut fights ended up being very easy, with our next opponent being Hunson Abadir, another character that we kind of just swept through. But up next was where things got a little bit more important with Magic Man, and more specifically the second Magic Man fight, because we could unlock a very powerful card from it. And this card I'm talking about is a spell named Which Way. Basically what it does is it gives you 1 mana point for every different landscape that's on the field. And you'll get a glimpse of why it's so good when I start using the main deck. Because for now, I was just grinding at the levels, sometimes getting unlucky with the drops, but eventually getting the correct drops as well. And even though I was fighting Magic Man over and over again, and it was taking a long time to get the Which Ways, this was actually also good in the way that we're getting to level up our Ricardio. So grinding out this level meant we're leveling up and getting a very good card, which once you see the strategy, you'll realize that it's definitely worth doing. And 4 Which Ways would have been preferred, but after getting my third one, I was getting kind of tired of playing that same level over and over again. So I decided that it was enough for now and went on the hunt for the second important card that we needed, which happens to be on level 6, and it's the Crystal Ball spell that you see towards the right. And this spell shuffles your hand back into your deck and draws you 5 new cards. And I got 2 from the battles, which was more than enough, and finally moved on to the next battle, which was against Princess Cookie. And though I was using a variation of the strategy I was going for, this one still had some flaws, so I'm not going to completely explain it, but there was this one cool card that we got named Cough Syrup, which basically switches the defense and offense stat of one of your creatures. And since the Field Stalker has so much health, you can just change it into its attack, making it deal 51 damage. And though this was solid, it made the fights very easy. I knew I could change some things around, making the deck much better and the battles end much faster. And as we're about to go on to level 44 against a Banana Guard, this is exactly what I did. I took out some of the filler cards, which basically guaranteed that I get my good cards. And this is where the strategy kind of starts to set in. You want to try to get the Brief Power or the Which Way to start off comboed with the Crystal Ball, and more importantly, you want to have a character from each different landscape, so you have 4 different landscapes, making the Which Way give you at least 4 magic points. But since my opponent also had the 5th one being Sandylands, the Which Ways were giving me 5 extra mana points. And this was only turn 3, and I'd already gotten down my Bog Banshee Angel and a Earl, which cost 7 in total. And you can kind of start understanding the purpose of this deck. It's basically getting down your strong creatures before your opponent can get down any of theirs. And the goal is basically blitzing them down before they even get a chance to get down any of their high cost creatures. And remember when I mentioned that it was insane the game gave us a Brief Power card for free? And this was the main reason why, because it makes all of your cards in that one turn cost 1 less, meaning your buildings all cost 0 and even your Which Ways cost 0. So you get a ton of mana, which allows you to get down your creatures. And then if you're running low on mana or don't like your cards, you can just use the Crystal Ball to shuffle your hand, getting more Which Ways and more creatures. And by looking at the opponent's mana, you can see that we're still on the 2nd turn, and using this strategy, I'd filled up every lane with all of my creatures. I literally had 19 mana points worth of creatures and buildings on the field, while the opponent only had a 1 mana mummy, but it didn't even matter as I blitzed his whole health down in that first turn. And this is also why you usually want your opponent to go first, because going first means that they can plant their creatures first, but by going second, you actually get their priority to attack. And if everything plays out perfectly, you can basically take out most of the opponents in 2 turns. But even if that doesn't happen, you get such a crazy advantage in the beginning that the opponent doesn't have any chance to catch up. And you might be wondering, if I didn't get lucky with the algebraic chest, what my strategy would have been instead. And basically it wouldn't have changed, because you can still get extremely high attack plants like Patchy the Pumpkin if you just battle and grind against opponents. So the chest basically just saved me a lot of time. And this is where I'm going to start speeding up a little bit, because I basically spammed the same exact strategy strategy against all of the opponents. But one more important thing was that level 53 you could get brief power from the opponent, which I wasn't expecting to get at all as it is a 5-star drop, so it's very rare. But somehow the very first chest that dropped ended up being a 5-star chest, which you guessed it was my second brief power, instantly getting added to the deck, making it just that much better. And I would have some chest opening segments here and there, but I never really got anything good afterwards. And surprisingly, I saw that level 56 you could actually get the Legion of Earlings normally. And after beating Gunter 3 times, our next opponent is the same opponent we see at the end, which is Ice King. This version is just a lot easier as we're only halfway through the adventure map, so he has a lot less health and his creatures are still kind of meh. So we're able to defeat him all 3 times pretty easily and move on to what I'd call the second phase of the adventure map, because all the drops get reset to normal with the addition of one of the drops being gold. I don't really know why that happens, but it doesn't really matter as we're not looking for any more cards. And I was pretty confident in these cards and that they could deal with any opponent thrown at him, even the final Ice King. But this belief only lasted till level 82, where we once again saw Hunson Abadir, who at first started playing cards that I didn't even remember existed, and he was playing gold cards as well. But most importantly, the game had decided that it didn't want to give me any of my brief powers or witch ways. So while I was stuck down at 7 health, he had a 125. And I tried saving it with my witch ways and my cards, which almost worked as I flooped the Pickler, lowering the defense of the opposing enemies by 5 each, which killed 2 of them, leaving only 2 in the lanes that I already had creatures in. But then, as there were 2 empty lanes on my side, he kind of had free reign and just placed a ghost tree in one of the empty lanes and was able to take me down without me posing much of a threat. So though this deck was good, RNG could still definitely get in the way and make you lose. But of course, the good thing is that we have unlimited retries, and I'm not gonna lie, on the second attempt, Hunson Abadir got destroyed. Our next very close battle was level 85 against Banana Guard, who had gotten me down to 9 health, but thankfully I was able to take his health down before he took all of mine down. And by beating these high levels, I was getting the option to craft some insane cards like the Husker Giant, but I neither had the right materials or the 7 million coins to craft it. But going back to the levels, level 90 had a card who would have been an insane buff to our deck because it was a Golden Sand Knight that had 30 attack and 30 defense. So basically better stats than all of my cards, and it would have been a very fitting replacement for the Traveling Wizard. And I was only asking for 1, but sadly, even after grinding this level for about an hour, I couldn't get my hands on it. So I had to just make the decision to move on to Pajama Finn, who like usual wasn't a difficult opponent at all. But coincidentally, the difficulty started picking up on level 101 once again against Lumpy Space Princess. And though I did have a pretty decent start with getting down most of my creatures, she ended up playing this insane card named Kung Fu Power, which destroys all of my creatures that were rarity 4 or higher, which was all of them. And this now left me with only the Legion of Earlings and the Pickler. And since I had run out of cards, there's actually the feature in the game, if you don't have any more cards that you can draw, you start taking damage equal to the level of your character, which normally isn't a problem for this deck because you blitz down the opponent so fast. But in this case, since I didn't do that and ran out of cards, my health eventually ticked down to 0, and I'd once again lost to Lumpy Space Princess. On the second attempt, she thankfully didn't play that overpowered Kung Fu spell, and I was able to insanely buff my creatures and pretty easily defeat her. But this was also around the time that we started to see a new type of creature, and that was the special black cards. And these black cards are special because they cost 0 mana and normally have the same level of stats and floop ability of a 5-star creature. And those are the guys that I actually didn't have access to because they're only available from this thing called the arena, which back in the day was you going against online opponents in a tourney. But since those servers don't exist anymore and you can't fight in the arena, there's no way to get these cards, which sort of puts us at a disadvantage since the opponent can have them, but I just don't have any way to get them. But thankfully, this deck ends up making my high cost creatures kind of similar to the 0 cost ones since I can get them down so early. So even the tougher opponents with the tougher cards don't stand much of a chance. And on the journey to the end, there was an insane moment on level 105 where basically I was in this predicament that if I didn't beat my opponent this turn, I would have lost. But looking at my creatures available, you can see that I just didn't have enough damage to deal with the opponent's health, meaning since I only had 14 health, one attack from either of the creatures would instantly take me down. But then I had this idea where I first placed my corn building and then replaced the Earl there with the Struzan Jin. And doing the math there, 23 plus 15 is still only 38. 38, so my only option was critting, which somehow I did with the Struzan Jin and ended up winning. And it's hard to bring the intensity to life, but in the moment, this was very stressful. Oh, and I actually got another pickler from this battle. But moving on to level 112, we're now only 8 levels away from the end. And things were definitely getting pretty insane here as the opponents just started spamming the black cards. Ash even ended up playing the Log Knight, which was one of the more nostalgic cards for me because it was the one and only black card that I had back in the day when I played this game. And if I remember correctly, it was one of the first 2 added, alongside the camera dude that you saw earlier. And we stopped on level 112 specifically because the Ash kept on playing some pretty powerful cards, and since the block meter was now so quick, I was constantly missing my blocks. And then there's this moment where my Legion of Earlings only had 8 health left, and Ash had this overpowered card named the Black Hole Pendant, which reduces the defense of all creatures by 50%, instantly killing my Legion of Earlings. And this wouldn't have been too big of a problem if I had another Witch Way and could have blocked the right 2 lanes that had creatures in them, but since I only had 5 mana to work with, I could only block 1 lane. And later on I had a heavy misplay where I had a Witch Way and could have planted both of my creatures onto the board, but instead I only placed the Pickler and for some reason decided to floop the Struzan Jin. I think I was hoping to get a crit again and win like I did that last time, but this was actually just impossible as it didn't deal enough damage even with the crit, so the Rainbow Barfer in the last lane ended up just taking me down, leading to yet another loss. But on the second attempt, we had an extremely strong start where I got down most of my creatures within the first turn and then just started plowing through all of the other creatures that Ash had placed down. And thankfully this time he wasn't spamming too many of the 0 mana black cards, which left many empty lanes and damage to be dealt. And so this time I ended up winning without losing a single health point, which kind of just shows you the randomness and RNG that's within the game. But what wasn't RNG was the inevitable fights against the final boss, Ice King, who as we jumped in we realized only plays the golden variants of every card, but thankfully I was able to put my best foot forward with a pretty strong start myself. And even though he played another gold card with 39 defense and used his hero ability which gave each of his creatures +2 attack, I was able to strongly stand my ground, getting him down to 23 HP after 2 turns. And just like that, we'd actually beaten the first fight against Ice King. I honestly think our deck was just that good, and we'd also definitely made the right decision in only using Ricardio ever since we unlocked him because he was almost the same level as Ice King, so our HP was nearly identical. It really just came down to whoever had the better starting hand, which on the second battle it was looking like it was going to be me again, as I'd gotten down my 3 strongest cards on the very first turn, and he ended up playing 1 golden traveling farmer alongside a black Sun King. But the Sun King stats were honestly pretty atrocious, so he wasn't too big of a threat in that empty lane, and so I more so just focused on attacking him directly head on. And for some reason it seemed like the computer had gotten pretty bad RNG with the creatures it got in its starting hand, because he only played the creatures on that first turn and then didn't play any others for 2 more turns, until he finally got a golden the Sludger. It was a pretty powerful and iconic plant, and I missed my block meter against it, so it took out my Legion of Earlings. But thankfully this didn't matter at all as Ice King had 31 health, so the Banshee would deal 29, and then the Struzan Jin's floop sent the creature back into the Ice King's hand, giving me way more than enough damage to deal with Ice King. And these battles against Ice King started to seem a little fishy because they're too easy for being the final battles. But as I clicked on to the final level, level 120, I quickly realized that the first 2 were just a build up to this one, because Ice King had 4 Corn landscapes, and the Corn landscape has some pretty strong synergies and can be regarded as the best one to play as. And though I had a pretty decent start getting down a lot of my cards, things did start getting a little problematic as the RNG for Ice King this time was in his favor, and he was able to body block basically every lane. And on top of that, he was increasing the damage of all of his cards using his hero ability. And then he played this monster of a card which was a golden Legion of Earlings, dealing a straight 36 damage to my face, giving him the lead. And even worse, I'd run out of cards in my deck, so I was taking a direct 24 damage to the face as well. And my Legion of Earlings was nowhere near as good and was prone to getting one shot, while his could take 1 whole hit. And things started getting even worse as he played the Corn Lord, which had 57 health and 15 attack damage. And I'm not gonna lie, I completely sold on both of my block meters, so my 2 main characters kind of just got wiped, leaving me with only the Pickler, Earl, and the Traveling Wizard, basically the 3 worst creatures that I had in my deck. And really my my only hope here was that I crit with one of my creatures, but I didn't do that with the Pickler or the Traveling Wizard, meaning that I was basically doomed. And just to rub it in my face, Ice King ended up playing another Golden Corn Lord, doing a couple of floop abilities, and then inevitably taking me down with the overpowered Legion of Earlings. And Ricardio made a pretty interesting face, but I had faith and jumped right back into the battle because I knew that I just needed the RNG to be in my favor. But it was looking bad once again as he played the Log Knight and a Golden Corn Dog to start off, alongside a second Log Knight. But thankfully I did have 2 Witch Ways and put up 2 of my own creatures against the Log Knights, taking one of them out and leaving the other at about half health. And I'm not gonna lie, I ended up missing the block meter again and things started looking bad, especially because the game had refused to give me a crystal ball. And after another turn I was down to 19 health, and one more turn later this corn dog with 25 attack ended up defeating me for a second time in a row. It was starting to look pretty horrific, but I went in again, and this time I started off with the perfect hand, giving me a brief power, 2 Witch Ways, and a crystal ball. And this allowed me to get down some pretty hefty creatures on the board that I knew could take down most of the enemies. And even better, I ended up critting with the Legion of Earling, which after the first turn led to the Ice King only having 27 health points. And as he placed a Sludger in front of the Legion of Earlings, taking it out, I knew that I'd still won because he didn't cover the Banshee, who was more than enough because Ice King only had 27 health compared to her 29 attack damage, and we had finally taken down the final boss battle. And the game called me a Card Wars Super Amadeus, which I was thankful for. But right after, they also mentioned that they'd be coming out with more quests, stars, and features, but of course we now know that that was a lie. But I was still appreciative of all the time that I spent playing the game and all the memories that I'd made. This was definitely a fun game to beat the entirety of after so many years. So if you ended up enjoying, consider subscribing. Okay, bye bye.